Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, an addict and an alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
Yes, and I'm LouiLou. My pronouns are he and him. I am in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol. I am a former Miss Castro Country Club, and I am always in search of balance. Yes, and each week we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery.
And our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
But before we do that, please like, share, and comment on this episode. And please give us a nice review.
And ding that bell.
Yes, ding.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, 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 ding.
And now the disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just a couple of friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
A wick.
How are you?
I'm good. It's been a long week, but I am getting ready for the weekend.
Shit.
Okay.
It was. Can I tell you, are you asking me how I'm doing?
Yes, exactly.
All right. Because do you have like at least 5 minutes? This past weekend was so overwhelming for me. There was so much. Okay, listen. For everyone listening, I'm glad Folsom exists. I'm glad that San Francisco is what it is. It is a space that is necessary. It is a space that's historical and all of those things. Uh-huh. It was so overwhelming for me as like a sex addict to be in the city because there was just so much sexuality. Like every meeting I went to, like people were basically wearing close to nothing in some cases. And then I remember going to my home group, and of course, like one of the prettiest people like I've ever seen in the fellowship was speaking, and then I felt resentful because I'm like, of course, the secretary chose this person to share. Anyway, I just was all up in my feelings about it. I was just so activated and overwhelmed because I was like, you know what? There's just so much sexuality in the city, and why does it? Oh God, it was just so much for me.
Yeah, no,
it was so overwhelming for me, and I was just kind of, and I've been like, I feel like this is a whole other episode, but I've been very, okay. The good news is that I had my orals this past weekend and they were approved. What a horrible, yeah, like I should not have juxtaposed those things. By orals, what I mean,
I had orals this weekend too.
You know how many times people have made that joke? But I remember, Eve, I was telling Eve, I was like, yeah, I have to sit for orals. And Eve was like, oh, how do I sit for orals? But yeah, I sat for orals. For folks unfamiliar with what that means, you have an oral defense when you're doing doctoral work. So you do your research and then you sit before a committee, and a committee asks you questions for about 2 hours about all the things that you've researched, and you have to defend it and all this other stuff. So it's been a long time coming. I've been working on my stuff for the last couple of years, and so it went really well. They kept saying it was excellent. I went in there like above and beyond prepared. I did all this shit I didn't.
Slideshow.
I did. I was going to say I did all this stuff that I didn't need to do. I had this like 13-page outline. I created a deck. And literally when I was like, hey, this is the stuff that I created, both of the primary chairs, they sat back and they just let me talk.
Nice. And
there were literally 0 questions. She only had issue with my use of the word heteronormativity and homophobia, but that's like a whole other conversation. But the point is that this was a stressful weekend for me.
It was I understand. I mean, you know what I like about Folsom?
What do you like about Folsom?
You know what I like about Folsom and Pride? Like, I don't have to go. Like, the only times, like, even in my active addiction, the only times I would go is if I were volunteering or doing something, if I had a reason, because I needed to be motivated to get out there. I like the energy of the city. I like because it feels like the past. It feels like how the city was, because the city is still kind of trying to recover from a devastating blow called COVID.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's like and really, I was drained. I think this weekend took a lot of energy, and I agree with you. It was very sexually charged, and I participated in making some of the stuff really charged. But I was like, yeah, I live for that.
Yeah, I don't anymore. I don't anymore. I think I have to be fair here because I think part of it for me is, and maybe this is another episode, part of it for me is my research, like my primary research is on the health of gay men, right? And a lot of that's been like at the forefront of my mind. I've been looking at statistics for the last like 15 or 20 years and looking at like the mental health stuff that we deal with. And disproportionately, are we impacted by substance abuse and process addiction and compulsive like behaviors, right? And so I think about this, and then I think about things like Folsom. And it's interesting you should mention the past because there is a part of me that feels like gay men are generationally stuck in the past. There's this way, like this, this maybe is a conversation for another time, like I said, but there is a way that I feel like there's certain behaviors that are normalized that are actually quite harmful to us. And one of those things is compulsive sexuality. And I think Folsom was created. Watch me, I'm going to get canceled in gay culture for this.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
I'm listening. But to your point, I mean, I agree.
Wait, there
with
was
you.
one other part. There was
Okay.
one other part. So there's this part of me that believes that looks at something like Folsom and wonders, like, was this necessary at one time, and it is no longer necessary? Yeah. But I feel like part of what I need to be aware of here is that this is a like subculture within the gay community that is underrepresented. So like I think about like leather and bears and stuff like that, which is, that generally falls out of like mainstream gaydom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, no. I feel like you're looking at it from a lens when you say compulsive behavior or whatever, from someone who maybe, sees, like, if you see everything as possibly or potentially people acting out compulsively or whatever, of course, then it seems like it's overkill or too much. I really feel like, it is what it is. I think that there are some people who don't get to experience this or who can't, and this is an opportunity for them to, to let their hair down, so to say.
Yeah, what I would want to see, as a scientist, as a researcher, what I would want to see are like, what are the stats on that, and so what I think about here is like when we're talking about compulsive sexual behavior, I'm willing to wager that like the vast majority of people who attend an event like Folsom are likely people who are also regularly maybe having casual sex. I don't know. I'm speculating, but every single person I know in recovery who participated are people who I know have very active sex lives. And so I have to be fair. Like I feel like one of the things I want to acknowledge for myself, and normally we're done with introductions at this point.
No.
One of the things,
this would make a great topic because like I'm already feeling like you're canceled. No.
Well, I think it's, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it's my responsibility as a person with like my training, it's because, who's going to do research on us and who's going to like do things that help our community, but people within that community. And so it's my responsibility as a researcher and as a psychologist in training to look at things like this. This is a population that I'm committed to. This is a population that I care about very deeply. And so I think it would be irresponsible for me not to like talk about the things that like I see, right? I think in my defense, and I feel like to be fair to the topic, I think that I need to acknowledge the lens by which I am looking at things, right? Like I know my partner would disagree with me on a lot of different levels when it comes to this. We've certainly have talked about this. I'm not by any means like ignorant to the different things that might be informing my opinion, right? It could be very likely that because I have issues or have had issues with like compulsive sexuality, that maybe I'm thinking like this is what other people are doing, right? I'll end by saying, and then we can obviously transition. I'll end by saying that.
Can we transition? Can we?
I'll end by saying, what do you mean?
No. Go ahead.
Oh, I'll end by saying that when I look at the research is quite clear that like gay men are disproportionately impacted by compulsive sexual behavior, that they're disproportionately impacted by substance and process addictions, right? So like that isn't just my opinion. That's science, and yeah, I feel like I wonder how in our community we contribute to our own downfall.
Can we move on?
Yeah. We can.
Yeah, let's move on. Because what are we talking about?
Did I just lose you?
No, you lost me. You lost me a while back, but it's a different conversation.
I love that this is being captured on air.
No, it's like, honestly, it's like, I know I appreciate but what I find sometimes is, like, as much as I want to save other people, as much as I want to do research, as you put it, it is up to the individual to make the decision that they're ready to receive what you have. So it's like, for me, I heard a lot of a lot of educated judgment in that. And don't get me wrong, it's like I'm not like, that's not my scene. But if I had heard that with regards to something that I really valued, I would be like, wow.
Sure.
But no, so really I think that, to be fair and to be fair to you, is like, how can you not bring your experience into anything that you do about that?
Of course, yeah.
So it's like, I'm always going to judge something based on my experience. I mean, I wish that I were perfect and that I wouldn't do that, but it happens. So please, let's move on.
Okay. So you saw it here. We had what was a public disagreement on a very hot topic.
Well, we always disagree, but it's like, I was just like, whatever. It's like, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, that isn't, okay, we probably should move on.
We disagree, but we don't necessarily agree on everything. But I think that it's important to not necessarily like start the same place. I usually hear from you, and then we get to kind of process it and then come out, with a better understanding of at least how each other,
Yeah. I mean, I think this is actually quite perfect, given that we're talking about aging and recovery, because I think a lot of like what I'm hearing and what you're saying, like to say like, I think you used the word scientific judgment, I think is what you said.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I said educational judgment,
like a veiled judgment. I want to be.
I was judging the judging.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm skilled.
I think I do need to say, and I think this speaks to our topic. To be fair, is that yeah, I mean, like we live in the United States where a lot of the decisions come back down to the individual, right? And I'm not advocating for the end of Folsom. I'm not advocating for the end of like casual sex culture. What I am advocating for is making decisions that with enough information. And yeah, I mean, I will I will mark my tone. I'll police my own tone, in that like I can hear. It would make sense if somebody was like listening to this and they go, "Ooh, Anthony sounds really judgy." Like I can hear that, and
yeah, because also like even this idea of what you're advocating for. In saying that, it almost suggests that you might believe that those individuals aren't doing that.
This is so interesting because a couple episodes back, we've talked about sex addiction.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was talking about sex addiction in that episode, you sided with me in saying like, "Oh, we're just giving people information."
Oh, no.
And you didn't seem to have that opinion then, but you have it now.
No. So I think that in the way that it was presented, I almost feel like that. Like, I think that what I'm feeling, it's like it may have everything to do with the way that it was presented. And so, no, I think I still agree, giving people information, but giving people information in a way that, I mean...
Is it my tone?
Yeah, I don't want to tone police or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do, it's one of those things where it's like, this is like it's always going to be a heated something. There's always, what it brings up for me, you have individuals who, and I know you see these advertisements all the time. It says, "Well, I'm a gay person, but I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, and I'm this kind of gay, I'm that kind of gay," or whatever. It's like, that always frustrates me because there's no right or wrong way to be a gay person, We're all individuals. If anything, it's a frustrating thing to be lumped in at all. I'm not a gay, I'm a Lewis,
Yeah. Yeah, I think Brandon, I feel like we need to earmark this for another episode. I think with respect to today's topic, aging and recovery, I think, aging and recovery comes with certain experiences, right? So one of the things that I hear a lot of I used to work with long-term survivors of HIV/AIDS, and they, there are these stories that they have, right? Like a lot of the men that I worked with were very against PrEP, right? They were like, there was this. And so, I heard all of these stories about then, and I hear all of these stories about how, there were older gay men who look at this younger generation and they think, for example, like, you don't realize how good you have it, like you have PrEP, you have this like wider acceptance, and that's not the way like we had it. I've heard, for example, people talk about like the feeling of community that came from, the 50s and 60s and 70s, within the gay community, that there was a strong sense of community, and that there's less of that feeling these days. I don't know, but I think there is this historical significance to our experiences and what it might feel like to age in recovery. The last thing I'll say is, and I've heard this with older gay men in recovery, is that as they age, they feel more invisible. That like they're not able to get the same kind of attention maybe that they got when they were younger. But of course, this is just like one perspective. I'm sure there are a bunch of different perspectives on what it must feel like to age in recovery, or just to age in general.
Absolutely. You know what I thought about when this topic came up? Like I was like 30, like say I was 39. I was 30s. Actually, I was 38 going on 39 when I came in. And so in my mind, I think I missed the boat on being a young person in Alcoholics Anonymous or any program. And I was perfectly fine with that. Like, cause I remember when I used to go out to the bars, even when I was in my early 20s, I still felt like I was too old to be out hanging out with these kids. When I'm spiritually sound, I really like the idea of getting older. I liked it because for me, what it has given me is this wisdom, this kind of understanding of how to be and how I want to be. And when I'm not drinking and using, it's also kind of, I feel like every year you get a little bit of esteem, you get a little bit of that confidence, that swag, that, yeah.
Yeah, I've been hearing, there's I think there was a meeting that was started not too long ago, here actually at the Castro Country Club. I think it's called Aging in Recovery, or something like that. And I remember, we should probably see if maybe that's also a topic for another time too, but the reason why that meeting was created. So I just remember, for example, that there were just a couple of people. They met at Western Roundup Living Sober. Actually, there was a conversation that was had there about like being, there were, LGBT folks were all in this conversation, and then we're talking about like what it feels like to be an older person in recovery. And there were some conversations around, of course, feeling invisible. There was also, for some people in recovery, saying like, I have 20 years, and not many people have 20 years, and I mean, not too long ago, you also mentioned you didn't like being the person with the most time in the room, and so I feel like there is probably like, I would imagine that if someone has like long-term sobriety, that can feel kind of lonely if you're like the one person in the room who has like X amount of time, and I also think that's probably difficult because you do kind of like, if we took a poll, right, and we're trying to track how much time people have, I think most people would get bunched up in the beginning, like maybe 1 year, 5 years, because long-term recovery is, I imagine it's not easy. How much time do you have? You have like 11, 14.
14, yeah.
14 years.
You know what's interesting? It's like, I feel like there's 3 ways to approach this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What you were just talking about, like having time. Mm-hmm. And it's not about how old you are, but having time, because we have folks who are fairly young who have a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And the more time that you have in recovery, the more, it definitely shows if you are someone who is showing up for yourself and really working the program and open to the possibilities of growth. Then there's this, what you were talking about before about, older individuals who struggle with this idea of like, the older that I get, the more I feel like left out. But there's that piece about aging and recovery that is all of us. For the young people who all of a sudden I'm no longer 25, I'm 35, and or I'm 45, or I'm getting older. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, and it's like the issues about aging and recovery are different. Like, you have the folks who are already there who are like, oh God, I feel it. And then those that says, oh God, now things are happening and I'm not feeling, and yeah.
Yeah, so I hear that there's like time in recovery. So like what it means to have so much time in recovery, and then there's the actual age of recovery. That doesn't make sense. What aging in recovery, like just being an older person. I've heard of people talking, for example, about feeling like they lost time. So like people who, they'll come into recovery and I'm thinking of someone who I think is absolutely, I don't know if it's fair to say her name, but she got sober like much later in life, and she's like a beacon of hope. I love being around this person. I think you know who I'm talking about. And she's like one of the first people I've met in recovery that has never said like, oh, I feel like I lost time. Yeah. Like she was just so grateful, and is so grateful to have the time that she has now, regardless of like how old she is in like human living years,
Yeah.
But then you have other people who they're discovering things about themselves. I'm thinking of specific people. You have other people in recovery who are discovering things about themselves that are beautiful and are wonderful. And they mourn, for example, like, oh, this sucks that I'm learning about this when I'm in my 50s. What would have my life been like if I would have learned this, much earlier?
I have those experiences at times.
Oh, yeah?
I think we have a comment.
Oh, let's hear it. Stephanie, Louis is spot on. I'm very young, 38, but it's lonely when 10 to 20 years of sobriety, and I imagine also in the 20 plus. Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder, I'm curious, Stephanie, if you want, or maybe Louis, you can answer this too. Like, what about that feels lonely? Like to have like so much time in the rooms and to be part of like a small group of people?
Well, I don't know. Okay, so when I came in, it was different. Like I had this tribe of folks, and I was fresh, and I was the reason for the season, because I always say that the newcomer is the most important person in the room. I always say, like when I'm sharing, that I always say the alcoholic in and out of the room that's still suffering is, in my mind, the most important person in the room. I don't care how much time you have, but I think sometimes we tend to. There's all this hierarchy. You get the good looking ones. You get the there's all the young ones. There are all these people that will get the attention. And this happens to me a bunch. Having a bunch of time and coming across as if I've got it together, and not, sometimes folks don't realize that you go through shit, and I might not show it as openly because, maybe whatever, I don't think, if it's a shortcoming or whatever, sometimes I like process it, but not to like, do you know what I'm getting at? It's like, it's one of those things where it's like, having the time does not mean that I'm all of a sudden cured. I joke about it sometimes. I'm recovered. No, you know what? I have this time. I think it's, in some ways, terrifying of the idea of me going out,
right?
Like, because I don't know that I would want to come back. I mean, it's like to try to start this shit again. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as you were talking about how I wonder if it gets harder to come back as you get time. Like I've heard of people, they go out after like 20 years. 20 years seems to be the magic number today.
Place this. I think we do ourselves a disservice. It's important in the beginning to appreciate the amount of time and to claim our progress, but there has to be a point and a conversation where we say, guess what? Time is not a defense against this disease. Time is it's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful because I wasn't finishing things, but now I'm finishing things, and I need to I'll celebrate that time, but it's not the most important thing. Today is the most important, and how I show up for myself. And we have a comment.
Let's see that comment. Anka writes, as an old timer with 30 plus years, I love the energy in a room with a bunch of newcomers, but I also miss having my own elders to look up to. We still need our elders to look up to, no matter how old we are.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Anka. That's a great thing. She changed her picture.
That's the point.
She said. So many of my sober elders have passed on. It can feel lonely at times. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's the point that I was making. Like, and it's not. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's like I find that like in some rooms, I I do have more time, or I'm amongst those, and I really appreciate especially in a room where you got folks who have 30 plus years and they're showing you how to do it still. I'm thinking of specific people who brighten my day, like HH, and other people that just really kind of represent. I mean, I get the frustrations of the individuals who feel maybe lost or whatever. Because not everybody's extroverted or knows how to kind of be with other people. But when you see it, it's like, this person's got all this time and they're still showing up and they're talking and telling me about times when they fell flat on their face and got right back up. Because that's always for me. That's my thing. It's like, I don't need you to tell me how to have a good time. Mm-hmm. I don't want to. Thank you for sharing how you did this and it was fun. Tell me, what got you through, how'd you get over? And seeing someone who shows up consistently, you see them going to meetings, you see them working with sponsors, you see them being of service, and it's none of that lip service,
Yeah, there's some people, it's so interesting because I'm thinking about people who have a lot of time. And some of these people are kind of like controversial, yes. but they have time, And one of the things that I think is actually quite magical about all of these people is that although socially they may be disruptive, if you get them one-on-one, they're sober. Oh, yeah. You know what I mean? Like maybe they don't have the best emotional sobriety.
I think what I find usually, and you find this when you see them in public or in the community and they're toxic or whatever they are, but when they share on the floor and they talk about, all of a sudden it's like, I believe that they're vessels. Yeah. Sometimes the vessels, it's the most unlikely places, but this is why I trust my higher power. My higher power sometimes speaks to people that I don't necessarily want to fuck with,
Yeah, I love that. I think, so there's another comment.
Yeah.
Don writes, there are gifts to getting older in recovery. I'll be 68 a month. You want to read this? I just read the last two.
Yeah, so that's fine. There are gifts of getting older in recovery. And I'll be 68 a month from today. My friend John used to say, as you get older and older, you care less and less about more and more, especially what other people think of me.
I love that, Don. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I also love this flurry of comments that are coming in.
I know, because I think that it is something.
Keep them coming.
It's something, no matter if you're 21 right now, it is, hey.
Sorry, with a month.
Go ahead. With a month, 6 months, 2 years, you have a crew. Lots of people navigating the same stuff. At 13 years, there's not a ton of examples for me to turn to. It's less options and more crispy options.
Ooh,
hey,
I love that.
Crispy. It's like, I'm all stuck.
Thank you, Stephanie. That actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
I never thought of it that way. But it's true, right? Like you have this group of people that you're with, and as you get more time, more people fall off. I think that's what she's saying,
Exactly.
And that can be devastating. I think when you feel like there's a community that's kind of falling off.
Yeah, it can really be tough.
You were going to say something before we took that comment.
Oh God, no! I'll come back to it. I'm sure I'll remember it. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about those people and how you hear them share from the floor, and they do feel like vessels.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have some people too who I think you're a good example of this for me, where I see you navigate certain over the last couple of years, especially on the podcast, where you've navigated certain situations. And it's really helpful for people like me, where I look at it, I'm like, holy shit, that's what it looks like to go through these things and to work a program around it. And to me, that's where people who have time are really useful. I feel like it's ways that they might not even be thinking about it. I think about, I don't want to say any names, but there's this one person in recovery who I absolutely love her. I love her sobriety. I love her recovery. You know what I mean? She'll take on commitments. Even if she's not the best at them, she still shows up. She always shows up.
Oh, I love that.
You know what I mean? She's kind and gentle in her interactions. She's not judgmental. She just seems to be floating, Mm-hmm. And she's retired. And then, you have people that you meet who have a lot of time and you don't want to be anywhere near them.
Well, the distinction is how they participate in their recovery, and are they being of service? Are they reaching out to others? Are they working with sponsors? Are they working with a sponsor? I mean, a lot of times you have individuals who, it's that contempt prior to investigation. Although you've experienced it, it's like, all of a sudden you forget the things that are magic. Like I love when I hear people talk about how they relapsed or whatever, they came back, or their program had gotten so stale, and then they just went back and did exactly what they did in the beginning. This is a really heavy 12-step episode, but it's like we talk about advanced recovery. Advanced recovery for us is just going back and doing what you did in the beginning, meaning like if you want to do a 90 and 90. Reaching out to the newcomer or anybody, calling people on a consistent basis, maybe changing sponsors and working through the steps again from a different perspective. I feel like I'm mentioning these things passionately because I'm at a loss for individuals who are, say they feel invisible and what have you, and they are not making efforts. I mean, it's easy, and I don't want to judge them because I may be that person one day where I just don't have the steam for it because lately I don't have the steam for it. I usually say I don't have the bandwidth to meet new people. So I don't know.
I'm thinking about, so there was one of my favorite essays written by Bill Wilson is called Emotional Sobriety, The Next Frontier. And one of the things he talks about is in early recovery, that, the compulsion to want to drink, right, is lifted. And then what happens, he calls them I think he uses the word old timers, that for old timers that the difficulty becomes emotional sobriety, right? They don't want to drink or use, but they might kind of cave or give into maybe we can call them their defects where they aren't emotionally sober. And I feel like, I'm of course,
I've got two very lovely people come to mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Probably the same two lovely people that I'm thinking of. And, and it's, I wonder about whether or not they're aware of it. Like one of these people, they complain a lot about this other person. And whenever they complain about this other person, I think to myself, like, you literally do the same exact thing to people.
I think, and this is the thing in normalizing behavior, because it is kind of like with our shortcomings, our defects. It's not easy to let go of behaviors that kind of, it's not easy to let go of behaviors that have kind of held you.
Of course.
And, we don't like change, and change is inevitable. What I will say, going back to this idea of aging, so me getting older, me doing the work, and me staying sober together, those components really kind of are a winning combination, because I've gone through some stuff that, a drunk me or a younger me would have fell apart over. Mm-hmm. I also, I feel like I always joke and say, like, now I see the world and listen, like all the lessons that my parents tried to teach me, I'm living them, and I open my mouth and I sound like my parents because I think that has to be wisdom. That's not me. That's me finally tapping into like those things. So I think that for me, this idea of aging, getting older is positive. I think maybe when I reach a certain age, I'll be like, whoa, when this stuff no longer works.
You mean the 12 steps?
No. No. You know what I'm talking about.
I do. I think so. We have another comment. Jaylon writes.
Jaylon.
I remember I kept having issues with an old-timer because of his approach and preachy nature at meetings. I thought to myself, he dishes all of this AA jargon, talks the talk while wanting people to respect his time, but doesn't practice it nor act spiritual in the least bit. I can acknowledge that. That's my perspective and am ultimately taking someone's inventory, but I have problems with old dogs who act like they can learn new tricks. What would you say to the old-timers out there who... There's another part of that? Old-timers who?
I think that was who. I think that was who, and
but there was an ellipses.
Was there more to?
Was there more to that?
Well,
it's coming. It's coming.
Oh, okay.
He's typing. I love. This is a very provoking question. I will. It's so interesting to me, and I wonder if part of what's happening at that level is, like, who's going to check me, boo? You know what I mean? Like, you have 25 years. Who are you going to listen to? Where I feel like if you have less time, there are probably more people who are going to be monitoring you.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Or like checking you.
One of the things that like as I get older, as I get wiser, as I mature, a lot of times what I will say, Jaylon, is like, you know what, thank you for that, but I'm good. You know, I don't, you know, I appreciate your thoughts, but I'm going to process this in a different way. And a lot of times, like we used to say all the time, is like, look, thank you, I have a sponsor.
You know what I'm realizing? Everything from the introduction today, like our conversation, to what we're talking about now is covered in the big book.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's covered in the big book. Can I say why? Because in the big book, it talks about on page 69 about how like what sober person doesn't have issues with sex. Some people would have us on a salt and pepper diet. Other people would have whatever, right? Like the extremes. And it also talks about the bleeding deacon, right? And this to me is very interesting because it's reminding me of how, in my opinion, like the big book or Alcoholics Anonymous does feel so divinely inspired because it does such a great job of basically like seeing us, you know, seeing
Absolutely.
the addict and the alcoholic. Because I think about, there's someone in mind, for example, who, whenever I'm at a meeting with him, there's some new criticism about the way it's done. Well, this is not the way it's done. Like one of the things they like to say is like, well, you know, in my time, like we did steps this way. And, you know, like newcomers, we didn't really let them share and da 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 da. And like, I'm not, and maybe
I like when they say I spilled more alcohol than you drank.
I hate like what is that? Like what is that? But
I
go
think
ahead.
that they are a gift. I think that they are a gift.
Who?
They are a gift. I'm talking about bleeding deacons or folks like that, and the old timers who are a little crabby, who maybe aren't the best representations of how to show up for yourself. They're a gift because it challenges me to check myself. Mm-hmm. Like, because when I shut down or when I'm not open to like. Because we get some young people who come in who are bubbly and all friendly and all over excited about it, like seriously, and we're like, and if I step back and realize, oh, you know what, this is what we need. It's kind of like in living sober. One of the things we struggle living sober, like it was the conference that we were like a part of. In the past, you had individuals who liked the way it was, and they weren't interested in change. And change is tough for anybody, and especially addicts and alcoholics. But, you know, getting this new vibrant energy in them or being open to it. Because, I mean, it's like you can be an old timer and constantly like, and we've seen it constantly like reinvigorating your program. I mean, I think that's the tough part about this. It's like getting older in recovery is okay. It is not. It's about how do I keep it fresh? How do I keep it fresh? We talked about this before, like maybe in earlier seasons, keeping my recovery fresh, because it's not. We can't, as much as I'd want to fight getting older, I can't. It's inevitable. But it's like what I can do, what I am in control of, is how I keep my program like from being stale.
I love that question. Keep it fresh. For folks who are just listening and are hearing me going da 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 da, it's because Louis was using his hands and it looked like he was voguing. This reminds me of something my service sponsor said to me when I was
service sponsor. Is that like a prostitute?
I'm kidding. Are we back to that? Are we going to start that conversation? My service sponsor says that Western Roundup Living Sober, or like any conference, you're in a spiritual sandbox, you know? And so you're in this spiritual sandbox and you get to use your spiritual tools to be with each other. A friend in recovery said to me, you know, Anthony, if you're going to be working with other alcoholics, you need to be in Al-Anon, because there are dynamics that show up while working with other alcoholics. But I love this question about keeping it fresh. And if for folks who are listening who have some time, I'd love to hear how you keep it fresh. If you want to shoot us a comment about how you keep it fresh.
I think we should have another conversation about that, because it's like
about keeping it fresh.
Yeah, because we were in a different place, like when we talked about that, Bonnie Violet and I. It's like, and I think that would be lovely to have a conversation about keeping the program fresh.
Yeah, it reminds me. I had one of the best pieces of, or maybe suggestions that was given to me in early,
like the suggestion of drinking water, breathing air.
Yeah, so it was in early recovery, and I remember, there's two things. So I had I forgot how much these two things meant to me. So one of my sponsors said to me, because I was like, oh, I'm feeling, I feel like I'm doing all the things. And one sponsor said to me, well, Anthony, like you need to stay ahead of your alcoholism. Like your alcoholism will adapt to whatever it is that you're doing. Right. So you're going to the same meetings and you're doing the same things. And like, what'll end up happening is it'll start to get stale. And so then it'll start kind of kicking in. Right. It's kind of like when you hear people say like, while you're in the rooms, your addiction is out in the parking lot doing push-ups. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But it reminds me of how like the more time I get, how I have to be very careful because they were not wrong when they said that it was cunning, baffling, and powerful.
Oh yeah.
And I think the way it shows up for me is in these really subtle ways sometimes.
Mm-hmm. It's that emotional thing. It's like, it's very, like I was talking about in the beginning, it was very obvious what I needed to work on. Mm-hmm. And the older that I get, the more time that I get, because my disease is insidious, it becomes more subtle. It's like recently what I've been struggling with this idea of being a people pleaser from the beginning, because it was so normalized that I didn't see it as an issue. It's almost how we come in and, we come in thinking that drugs and alcohol was the thing helping us when it was actually hurting us. It's that like, wait a minute, I thought it was okay because I'd been doing it so long, but it's not okay. And if it weren't, thank God for the body and my mind. It's like I'd reached a head. It had come to a head where it was painful. And I am trying to get to a place where I don't have to be in misery before I do something about it. But apparently this was an issue that came, I had to deal with.
What was the issue?
No, okay, so I'd been struggling with Al-Anon stuff, like people pleasing.
Sure. Okay.
And so it's like it was showing up in all of these different places. And if it weren't for the fact that I was in recovery, or at least talking to somebody on a regular and being open to it, I would not have been able to connect the dots.
Yeah, right.
Because really, from where I was sitting, they seemed like very isolated situations, but really underneath it was the same thing. It was just showing up in different ways, and that to me is scary because I was thinking, like, I'm a person. I believe that I have very clear boundaries about some things, but I think because this was something that was kind of so deep in myself, it was something that it was just a second nature. I didn't think much of it. I didn't think of it as anything, and now I get to kind of unlearn certain behaviors and the difficulties. I'm sorry. It's like it's really causing me grief.
I hear that. And we have 5 minutes left, and of course we'll keep talking after for the podcast exclusive stuff that we don't film. You're reminding me of like the way my anxiety shows up. So like yesterday, for example, I was talking to someone I care about deeply, and my anxiety started to rise. And the long and the short of it is, we were able to put out a fire before it started, but I woke up this morning feeling like emotionally hungover.
Oh yeah.
And thinking to myself like, oh my God, like, why am I like this? And how, those kind of things, the more time I get and the more I work my program, there's always something new, that unveils itself.
Oh God.
Yeah. And we maybe should have another one, because I'd love to hear about, like, for folks who have like some time, like what are some of the new things that they didn't anticipate having to address as they got older?
Because we spent most of today talking about, like, our opening was really long. It's like, how are you doing?
Oh my God.
Well, motherfucker.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Brandon, actually. I don't want that aired. I want it to, because I feel like some of those thoughts are underdeveloped for me.
But Brandon has this look on his face like, what? Exactly.
Well, can I tell you why? Well, here's why. Because obviously, like, I feel like it's an incomplete conversation.
It is.
And you're one of my closest friends. I love you too. And so for you to have that reaction tells me that, like, we have context, and I worry about, maybe this is just fear. I worry about how other people are going to hear it. 'Cause I'm like, wow, Lewis's reaction is different from what I was expecting. So I worry about like what that might like look like for people who they might only catch that clip, or they might only, so I don't know, Brandon.
It's a weird one on my end. What I will say, in defense of me thinking that the way you presented it, I brought something else to that, and it triggered and got me going. And all of a sudden, it's like, what?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like the one thing I feel like I need to mention here is that like, you know better than anyone that I'm not a fucking prude.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
uh-huh.
you, and anyone in recovery who knows me personally knows like, I'm not by any means like advocating that we like, everyone stop having sex. You know what I mean? That's like not what I'm saying at all.
I was like holding on dearly. You're not taking away my sex. Okay.
Like I'm going to call the governor, chastity belts for everyone. Right. And so like that by no means is my story. That by no means is my story, nor am I like advocating for like a salt and pepper diet, as it says in the big book. And so, and I wish I've said that like earlier. So some of those thoughts are like, they're one-sided in that like, it's an incomplete conversation, right? Cause one of the things that I've been thinking about is, I feel like someone needs to rewrite like The Ethical Slut, for example. I think it's like an antiquated book, and that there are other ways of like having casual sex and being in community and having like sexual lives that are fulfilling.
I feel like that's what you're working towards. You're going to do it.
What are you talking about? To get toward, yeah.
Rewriting The Ethical Slut.
Yeah, like rewrite, like there are ways, like I've learned so much about my own sexuality and about like healthy sexuality that can look like you can do all of the things, we talk about being sober, right? We can do all of the things sober that we did while we were drinking and using. And I think one of those things that we can do is like, we can have like active, adventurous sex lives and do it in a way where we're not taking from our recovery. Which is part of a longer conversation, which is why I'm like, I wish I would have said those things in the beginning. I think he just told us we have 0 minutes left.
I know, I'm waiting for it to pop up.
Okay, so let's do the thing, Brandon.
The Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ barbecue recovery community.
The LGBT barbecue community. We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Yes, and our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community opportunity and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
Yes, and tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m.-ish Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
And rate us.
Yeah, rate us, leave comments. Did you turn it on? Are we still recording? Oh, okay.
That was interesting.
That was interesting.
Well, no, it's like, we definitely like it. It's almost like, we say we're going to talk about one thing and then it becomes something else.
Yeah.
Actually, I like that. It's like I'm always...
that might have been an interesting conversation to see like play out.
Oh, absolutely. We probably would have been fighting. Like I'm all...
No. You think so?
No, we wouldn't have. No, because it's like it's just honestly, it's like it wouldn't have gone that far. I mean, I that's not my thing.
I felt like you shut down a little bit.
Well, no, I shut down because like, you were making valid points. You're making really valid points, but also it's like I was thinking, it's like,
what did you? I'm curious. What is it that I said that upset you, or what was the like? What is it? I want to know because that would be helpful for me.
Well, no, when I hear these ideas about like I'm trying to, it is my responsibility to do this for this community and what have you, and I'm all thinking, I get it, or maybe not. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was like it's the conversation. It was a larger thing. I can't tell you if it's any one piece. It wasn't necessarily tone. It was just maybe what I was transported back to. Like I talked about like. Hearing these types of gay men who are critical of others because that's not what they do. And
Did it? So it sounded like I was being
it
critical.
sounded like that.
Okay.
It sounded like that.
Okay.
And I think maybe that was, maybe it was in that all of a sudden I was feeling something. And then it had gone so deep. Like, I was just like, okay, good. Yeah, because I was like, is he going to shut up?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the impression I got from you. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And what I'm thinking of is if we could have that conversation differently, if we were to have it again, I think what I would do is maybe explain, I would have given it more context. So for example, I would have talked about, because it's interesting because what we started off with was like, I was telling you about how the weekend was very difficult for me.
Yeah.
Right. And I was thinking about how I was impacted by the weekend, and I was wondering about, and I had conversations with other people in the program who had a very similar reaction that I did. And so maybe start to think about like, oh, I wonder like how it is, like, I wonder how helpful this is. And then if we pull the lens a little further back, I would have talked about like my own sexual behavior and like the things that I've done, and how there was shame in some of it, and how like I'm grateful for things like Folsom that help people get out of that shame, and in fact, events like Folsom have been instrumental in pushing back on these really destructive narratives about like sexuality and ways of trying to kind of like make entire communities invisible.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I would have had the conversation differently in that way, and then also talked about. It's interesting because when I hear you say back what I said about like, oh, I feel like a responsibility to care for my community. There's something about that, like that kind of rubs me the wrong way, because I'm like, oh, I don't like that's what it sounded like. Because no one asked me to do anything.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's kind of where I was, because like if I had come to him, I was like, and I kind of said like, people have to be open to it, receptive to it, like as much as, and it might have very well have been like one of the things I struggled with. One of my shortcomings early on was I would give it before it was offered. And I had to telling myself, if it's not solicited, don't give it. As much as you think you're being helpful, you might not be being helpful. And if anything, you might be pushing away the person that you're trying to help.
Yeah, that's interesting, because what I was trying to do, and I think this is part of what made it feel charged, was I was asking a question, right? And like the question was, as gay men, are we doing things that hurt us? And that was the question, right? And then I think where I think I lost you is when I started talking about like statistics and stuff like that, because
I was like, you did math.
yeah. Like I think that's where I lost, because, and I think this is why, and looking back, I think this is why. I think it's because though that kind of language, like citing statistics and having that kind of conversation, like that sounds a lot like what conservative groups have done to the LGBT plus community. They'll talk about like these statistics, and they'll use science as a way of saying, I'm not judging, I'm citing facts, And I think that probably what happened here is like to sit at a table with like a friend who is maybe sounding really similar. Like I can see how that could be really off-putting. And so that's why I feel like it was very unskillful for me the way I went about that conversation. Like I wish I would have gone about it differently. I think I feel like a responsibility to acknowledge like my own anxieties around that, and how, like there was a moment like while we were talking where I was like, oh, I felt charged too, not because of what you were saying, but because of like what was coming up for me around it, and feeling like I've been harmed by certain things. And, and so like one of the kind of difficulties for me is like, as I age in recovery, is figuring out like, what are my opinions about things, and where do these opinions come from? And, am I becoming, stodgy and kind of stuffy as I get older, and what's that about, So yeah, I wish I would have.
Yeah, because I think changing my view about things is fine, but changing my view about things and expecting other people to change their views, I think that's a challenge that we all struggle with. I think that like I feel like that conversation it probably would not have gone that way had we had we been able to flesh it out.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I feel like it was, you know what it's making me think of is, you know how they say, like when you're meeting new people, you don't talk about like politics, religion, or sports. Yeah. And I feel like we need
a drive by Anthony.
Yeah, it was. And I feel like this is like a good example of, yeah, I mean, this was like I don't know. I should have been more skillful in how I brought that up.
Yeah,
and
you're quite skilled. So
well, I mean, but I feel like, well, not if I'm having like an unintended like reaction. You know what I mean?
This is a great place to have this happen.
Yeah, not when we have an audience.
Yes, it is. It's
like I don't know,
because maybe we're offering.
Can you?
Maybe what's happening is like I think that like Bonnie Violet and I talked about like self correcting.
Yeah.
And there's something when, you know, from someone who's like you, who is very kind of, who's very kind of like, you know, very kind of clinical, very, you know, thoughtful, very all like, for those of us who aren't like that, it's like, I can watch you and think, this guy that never makes a mistake. This guy's not human. He's a computer.
Which is not true.
That's not the thing. But the reason why I mention it is because it's like, you know, the times when you have it, I mean, that's when you become relatable to people, you know? And I'm not saying you're not relatable all the time, but those times, I think that's a gift, you know?
You know, that's so interesting because that's one of the things I struggle with is that I think people often have that opinion about me. And what's difficult for me about that is like my whole life I've had to code switch, right? Like I'm a man of color. I was raised in the hood. And so I had to show up in that space a certain way. In academic spaces, I have to show up a certain way. When I'm around white people who may be intimidated or frightened by what I look like, I have to show up a certain way. And when I'm around gay men, I notice that I also have to show up. Sometimes it feels like I have to show up a different way. And so what I'm hearing here is like for me to be clinical, it makes me think about, like I literally just had my orals just a couple days ago, and how like so much of my life has been being in those spaces, right? Being in these like really heady spaces. And it's been through recovery that I've been able to learn how to kind of drop into my body and to be more feelings oriented. And it's interesting because my partner and I were talking about this recently, about how like with him, he gets to see the side of me that really very few people get to see. You know, he gets to see this like vulnerable, squishy version of me. And you're also reminding me of how like years ago, someone was saying to me, we were playing a game. I think we were playing like Ultimate Werewolf or something like that. And I was like, and I remember saying, I'm like, why don't people ever believe me? And they were like, Anthony, people don't believe you because you sound really heady. There's like no feeling in what you're saying. So it's really hard to like connect to what you're saying. And I thought about that and I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because one of the ways that like I've learned to protect myself over the years has been to be kind of like hyper like analytical and kind of like very kind of like centered in my brain. And what I haven't realized is, or maybe I have inconsistently realized, is that there is a way that that can be perceived, and it feels unrelatable. And I feel like it also kind of sets me up for people to kind of fight me when I'm showing up in that way. When it's unintended. Brandon, are you done texting? Should we?
Oh my God.
So as usual, thank you. If you've listened this far, thank you so much. We love you.
Exactly. And share with us like what you learned from this.
Yeah. Share, rate.
Interaction. Yes.
Do all the things. Tell your friends about us. Tell your enemies about us.
Yes.
Just tell people about us.
Especially tell your enemies
Tell
about
them.
us.
All right. We love you.
Bye-bye.